Chapter 1, Part 5. Every time he and Voldemort had one of these encounters, it usually led to one or the other of them injured enough to require a month or two of recovery. Harry was Voldemort's personal obsession now. Harry alone had done more damage to his forces than anyone else, and the margin wasn't even close. After he'd lost the last of his friends and allies, Harry had gone on the offensive, and it had resulted in the current state of affairs. Though the question was academic, at times Harry wondered if he had personally killed more witches and wizards than Voldemort had. He was nearly positive that he was responsible for more deaths, either indirectly killing enemies or foolishly leading friends to their doom, not to mention the hundreds and possibly thousands of demons he had slain. It had been almost 3 months since their last encounter. In that encounter, Voldemort had been the one forced to retreat, though Harry had managed to take out 2 of his remaining Death Eaters during the fight. They had attempted to trap him, and he had turned it around on them. Harry had spent the last 4 months as a non-entity ghosting through the Muggle world, eating or sleeping when he required it. It wasn't hard to steal when one had an invisibility cloak, a disillusionment spell, confundus spells, notice-me-not spells, not to mention various memory charms and obliviates. He stole most of what he needed to live, and even some things he didn't need. Before the last encounter, when he was recovering for almost 3 weeks from a curse that made his bones grow uncontrollably, he had stolen what had probably been his 8th Muggle electronic device. It was mostly just a project to keep him from going insane. But he had been immeasurably satisfied when he'd managed to etch runes into a popular MP3 player that allowed him to use it when he ventured through magic areas, and continually charged it. He'd hardly taken the headphones off since he'd managed that bit of magic. Music forced his mind to focus on something, and had let him try and figure out other ways to apply the runes he was learning in the test and see method. Of course, when he'd tried the same rune structure on a television in a Muggle motel, it had managed not only to blow out the wiring on the television, but melted the wiring in half of the motel as well. But the activity as a whole kept him focused on something besides waiting for Voldemort to stick his head up again. He wouldn't go so far as to say it kept him sane, but it helped him from going completely round the bend. Even Hedwig seemed to have favorite songs because there were several where she'd land on his shoulder when they played. Okay, maybe it just kept him from going further around the bend. He stopped for a brief moment, taking a few moments to organize his thoughts so that he wouldn't be entering the fight in a whimsical mood. Who knew what half-brained trap Voldemort was trying to come up with this time? Harry often wondered why Voldemort continued. Maybe it was just out of habit at this point. There was no more wizarding world to rule. He could clearly sense himself getting closer to Voldemort, who now obviously lay in wait ahead of him. He glanced up at Hedwig, but she gave no warning or sign that there was anyone but Voldemort ahead of himself. That, in and of itself, was suspicious. He began stretching his senses out warily, preparing in case any of the few remaining Death Eaters had prepared an ambush. As he approached the ruins, he saw that some of the rubble had been cleared out, and there was Voldemort, standing and waving his wand in the air, clearly casting at a tall, thin object, though he couldn't hear the words. Voldemort was surrounded by different piles of rocks and rubble, though nothing that completely interfered with Harry's line of sight. Harry moved closer more warily now. It wasn't like Voldemort to leave himself wide open like this. Harry stepped forward, preparing to call out. There really was no point in trying to sneak up on one another. They could always sense each other. He took another step only to get blown back 20 feet. He rolled onto the ground, springing to his feet out of the roll, most of his weight going onto his good leg, which compensated for his bad one. He had his wand ready to snap forward a shield to protect himself, expecting a follow-up attack from Voldemort. But there was nothing.